Analise o roteiro deste título. Duke disrespected at dinner. Bumpy's razor made the mobster vanish. Seja breve de uma nota ponto. Roteiro. Bumpy's razor. The night Duke was disrespected. The champagne spray caught the light like 1,000 tiny diamonds. Then it hit Duke Ellington's face. March 15, 1935. Seavoy Ballroom, Harlem. 4,000 people watching. The music stopped. Just like that, mid-phrase, mid-note, the entire orchestra went silent. Duke stood at the piano, champagne dripping from his coat, his face frozen in shock. The man who sprayed him? Vic the Blade Romano. Italian mobster. Dutch Schultz's enforcer. A man who thought Harlem was his playground. He was laughing. His whole table was laughing. White men in expensive suits, drunk on champagne and arrogance, treating the greatest jazz musician of the era like a servant they could humiliate for sport. The room held its breath. 4,000 bodies, 4,000 witnesses. Not a single person moved, because everyone knew what this moment meant. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a test. Would Harlem allow this? Would they let an outsider walk into their kingdom and spit on their king? In the back corner of the ballroom, a slim figure in a tailored suit slowly stood up. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 28 years old. Patent leather shoes, straight razor in his pocket. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't pull a gun. He just started walking. Click, click, click. His shoes on the maple floor, each step like a drumbeat. The crowd parted without being asked. People turned their heads, following his path across the ballroom. Some knew what was coming. Others just felt it, that electric charge in the air before lightning strikes. Bumpy walked like a man who had all the time in the world. Because he did. Vic's table saw him coming. The laughter died. One of Vic's men whispered something. Another shifted in his seat, hand moving toward his jacket. But Bumpy kept walking. 30 feet, 20, 10. When he reached the table, he stopped, looked down at Vic, said nothing, just stared. Vic tried to laugh it off. "What's your problem, boy?" Boy. The word hung in the air like smoke. Bumpy's hand moved to his waistband, slow, deliberate. He pulled out the straight razor, flicked it open with a soft click. The blade caught the chandelier light, cold steel, polished to a mirror shine. Still, Bumpy said nothing. He just held the razor. Let Vic see it. Let the whole table see it. A gun says, "I can kill you from a distance." A razor says, "I'm going to get close enough to look you in the eyes while I do it." Vic's smile vanished. His throat moved as he swallowed. What do you want?" Bumpy's voice came out quiet, calm, colder than the steel in his hand. "You're going to walk over to that piano. You're going to apologize to that man. And then you're going to leave this ballroom and never come back to Harlem." Vic looked around the table. His men avoided his eyes. He looked at the crowd. 4,000 faces watching him, waiting. He looked back at Bumpy, at the razor, at the absolute certainty in Bumpy's eyes. "And if I don't?" Bumpy leaned down, put his face 6 inches from Vic's. "Then I'm going to carve my name into your face so every time you look in a mirror for the rest of your life, you remember the night you disrespected Duke Ellington in Harlem." The table was silent. The ballroom was silent. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Vic tried to hold Bumpy's stare. Couldn't. His eyes dropped. His hands started shaking. I didn't mean nothing by it. It was just a joke." "Walk." Vic stood up. His legs barely held him. He walked across the ballroom floor. The same floor Bumpy had just crossed, but his steps were different. Uncertain. Ashamed. Everyone watched. He reached the piano. Duke was still standing there. Champagne stains on his jacket. Hands resting on the keys. Vic opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I apologize, Mr. Ellington. I was out of line." The words came out strangled, forced, but they came out. Duke looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once, said nothing. Vic turned around, walked back to his table, grabbed his coat. His men scrambled to follow. They walked out of the Seavoy Ballroom in silence. The heavy doors swung shut behind them. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then someone clapped, then another, then the whole ballroom erupted. Not celebration, restoration. The applause was fierce, defiant, relieved. Bumpy closed his razor, slipped it back into his pocket, walked back to his table, sat down. Duke returned to the piano, placed his hands on the keys, started to play. The orchestra joined him, first the bass, then the drums, then the horns. The music swelled. People started dancing again. But the energy had changed. The notes carried weight now. Everyone in that room understood what had just happened. A line had been drawn. Harlem was not a place where you could humiliate black excellence and walk away laughing. Not anymore, not while Bumpy Johnson was watching. By morning, the story had spread across every street corner in Harlem. By noon, it reached the Italian mob's headquarters downtown. By evening, Vic the Blade Romano had left New York City. He never came back. Not to Harlem. Not to New York. He vanished, like the title promised. Some say he went to Chicago, others say Philadelphia. A few claimed he fled all the way to California. Nobody knew for sure. Nobody cared. The point was made. The Dutch Schultz operation, the same mob that had been muscling into Harlem's clubs, extorting musicians, demanding protection money from black-owned businesses, suddenly pulled back. Not completely, but noticeably. The open disrespect stopped. The casual violence cooled, because word had gotten around about what happened to men who crossed certain lines, about what happened when you disrespected Harlem's artists in their own house, about what happened when Bumpy Johnson pulled out his razor. The razor itself became legendary. People talked about it like it had a life of its own. You see Bumpy's blade last night? Man pulled that steel and Vic nearly fainted. That razor got more bodies on it than most guns. The last part wasn't entirely true, but legends don't care about accuracy. They care about power. And Bumpy's razor had power. It represented something deeper than violence. It was intimacy. A gun could kill from across a room, anonymous, distant, cold. But a razor required you to get close, to look your enemy in the eyes, to make them understand, on a visceral level, that you were willing to cross that final line. Most men weren't. Bumpy was. And that's what made him different. He didn't just threaten violence. He offered it. Close, personal, unavoidable. That intimacy was the deterrent. Men like Vic could handle guns. They'd been in shootouts. They'd traded bullets. But a razor, that was different. That was a man saying, I'm going to touch you. I'm going to mark you. I'm going to make you carry this moment on your skin forever. Very few men could stare that down. Vic couldn't. And everyone knew it. The weeks after the Seavoy incident were tense. Bumpy's people waited for retaliation. Dutch Schultz was not a man who accepted humiliation quietly. But the hit never came. Why? Because Schultz did the math. A gang war in Harlem would be expensive. Bumpy had the streets, had the loyalty, had people who would fight for him, not because they were paid, but because they believed in what he represented. Schultz had soldiers. Bumpy had a kingdom. There's a difference. So Schultz let it go. Wrote off Vic as an idiot who got what he deserved. Pulled his operations back to the edges. And Harlem breathed a little easier. The Seavoy Ballroom became hallowed ground after that night. Musicians played there with a different energy. The crowd came with a different pride. It wasn't just a dance hall anymore. It was a symbol, a place where dignity had been defended, where the community had drawn a line and said, not here, not us, not anymore. Duke Ellington never forgot that night. Years later, when Bumpy was locked up on a charge that probably shouldn't have stuck, Duke visited him. Not for publicity, not for a photo op, just a quiet visit in a cold prison corridor. They spoke for 20 minutes. What they said, nobody knows. But when Duke left, he had tears in his eyes. And Bumpy, who never cried, who never showed weakness, smiled. Because he understood. He had protected something sacred that night at the Seavoy. Not just Duke. But the idea that black art deserved respect. That black spaces deserved protection. That Harlem was not a playground for outsiders to do whatever they wanted. That razor in his pocket, that small piece of steel, had defended all of that. And when Bumpy Johnson died, decades later, that razor was still with him, found in his jacket pocket. The blade was worn smooth from years of handling. The mother-of-pearl handle had lost some of its shine, but it was still sharp, still ready, still carrying the weight of every moment it had been pulled, every line it had drawn, every man it had warned. Historians argue about Bumpy. Was he a gangster or a guardian, a criminal or a king? The answer is both. He enforced his rule with violence when necessary. He protected his people with the same violence. He crossed moral lines that make us uncomfortable, but he also defended a community that had no one else to defend it. In a world where the police didn't protect black neighborhoods, where white mobsters felt entitled to take whatever they wanted, where artists could be humiliated in public with no consequences. In that world, Bumpy Johnson was necessary. His razor was necessary. The night at the Seavoy was necessary, not because violence is good, but because sometimes dignity has to be defended with force. Sometimes respect has to be demanded, not requested. Sometimes a line has to be drawn in steel and blood. And when that line is drawn, you have to be willing to enforce it. Bumpy was willing. That's what made him a legend. The story of that night, Duke disrespected, Bumpy's walk, the razor, the apology, Vic's exile, spread far beyond Harlem. It reached Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. Every black neighborhood that was fighting to protect its own spaces heard the story and understood the lesson. You don't have to accept disrespect. You don't have to let outsiders dictate the terms. You don't have to smile and bow and take it. Sometimes you can stand up. Sometimes you can walk across a maple floor with steel in your pocket and a purpose in your heart. Sometimes you can make a mobster vanish just by being willing to get close enough to use a razor instead of a gun. That's what Bumpy taught Harlem. That's what that night at the Seavoy meant. It wasn't just about Duke. It wasn't just about one insult and one apology. It was about power. Who has it? Who uses it? And what happens when a community decides it's not going to be a victim anymore? Bumpy Johnson made that decision on March 15, 1935, with a straight razor and a slow walk across a ballroom floor, and a voice that said, calm and cold, "You're going to apologize, and then you're going to leave, and you're never coming back." Vincent. Vic the Blade. Romano did exactly that. He apologized. He left. He never came back. He vanished, just like the title said. And Harlem remembered. The elders told the story to the young. The musicians wrote songs that hinted at it. The hustlers and numbers runners and street corner philosophers all knew the tale. Some details changed over time. Some got exaggerated. But the core remained true. The night Duke Ellington was disrespected at dinner. The night Bumpy Johnson's razor made a mobster vanish. The night Harlem drew a line. And the night everyone learned what happened when you crossed it. If you think respect has to be earned and defended, share this story. If you've ever had to stand up when no one else would, leave a comment. And if you want more forgotten histories about the nights that changed cities, hit subscribe. Because stories like this, stories about dignity, power, and the razor's edge between justice and violence, these stories matter. They remind us that communities have always had to defend themselves, that heroes don't always wear badges, that sometimes the man with the razor is the one protecting the kingdom. Bumpy Johnson understood that. Duke Ellington understood that. And on March 15, 1935, everyone at the Seavoy Ballroom understood it too. The champagne spray that started it all, that moment of casual cruelty, became the spark. The razor in Bumpy's pocket became the flame. And Vincent, Vic the Blade Romano, became the ash. Blown away by the wind, vanished, never to return. That's how legends are made. One razor, one night, one line drawn in steel, and a whole city that learned to stand up. That's the real story of the night Duke was disrespected, and Bumpy made a mobster vanish with nothing but a razor and the will to use it. If you think respect is earned through action, not words, hit that like button. If you want more untold stories about the men who protected Harlem when no one else would, subscribe and turn on notifications. And drop a comment. What would you have done if you were at that table? Would you have walked across that floor, or would you have stayed silent? Because the difference between a legend and a bystander is simple. Legends act when it matters most. Bumpy acted, Duke remembered, and Harlem never forgot. See you in the next story.